Hey everybody. I'll try not to make this too long this week. Just want to hit on a couple points from the readings that uh, stuck with me this week, if you will. So the first one's from the school video, and the thing that got me really riled up from the school video is the part on vouchers, which I know took a large part of the video. But where I live in Arizona, vouchers are very controversial and a hot topic. In my personal opinion, the vouchers are ruining public education, in my opinion. Um, I think that, especially in Arizona, they cover barely the cost, barely part of the cost, rather, of a private education. So you still have to make up the other part. So most often, the students who need it the most are not accessing it because they don't have the funds to come up with the other part of the tuition. So most often, already well-off students are using it to step out of the private of the public education system on the state's dime. And frankly, I think that vouchers generally keep poor students in poor neighborhoods and help well-off students get out of neighborhood schools and into private schools. Um, time and time again, we've seen voucher systems and privatization of schools uh, run like businesses, and time again, we've seen that it doesn't work, and yet we keep on doing this. It's sort of like in the Diane Ravitch article. Um, she talked about the magic beans idea, or at least that's what I call it. The like, if someone comes along all the time, or multiple come along all the time, it's like the like magic fix for education, and like this is the thing that's going to solve the education crisis finally. But there's no magic fix. This is a large problem. Like nothing is going to get better quickly. Nothing's going to get better magically. And so I think that it's really frustrating to see things like vouchers and see privatization of schools and to see people advocating for schools to be run like businesses when schools cannot be run like businesses. And we've seen privatization of schools and public education not work. And we've seen what happens when we let charter schools in, and the lack of transparency of what goes on there and the lack of oversight, especially in Arizona, of the charter school system. And we've seen what happens when people come in with like magic beans fixes and they don't ultimately come up with much in the way of results. Um, so those are some of my first thoughts this week. Some of the other things I wanted to hit on, obviously, a nation at risk. Um, I've studied this quite extensively. This was a topic in one of my other grad school classes, but also I know this is a history teacher, and I just like learning about stuff. That's why I knew about this prior. And uh, a nation at risk is one of the most frustrating things that has ever happened in America, in my opinion, because I think a bunch of men and women who knew very little about what it actually meant to be a public school educator took data sets and cherry picked the pieces they wanted of those data sets and painted a picture of a dying school system when that school system was not necessarily dying. This is the early 80s. It was a time when the largest amount of students ever in American history had been being schooled. And some of the other indicators provided showed that the school system was not dying the way that a nation at risk wanted people to believe. But that was the narrative that the people who wrote A Nation at Risk put out there and that the media glommed onto. Um, and unfortunately, it's led to about 40 years of state testing and oversight and teacher improvement and you know, an emphasis on improvement and testing and, you know, this, again, business like culture in schools that is not sustainable. Um, and then finally, the other um, thing that I wanted to hit on, obviously, is the bilingual education. Reading again from Ovando. Um, I don't know how many times I can say it, but uh, you know, we're doing these kids a disservice. Um, we really are. Um, I've got a kid right now that came from a French-speaking country in the Pacific a few months ago. And she knows basically no English, and I know that sinking or swimming her right now is doing her nothing, and that's what basically the education system is telling us, right? Well, sink or swim, and like she's either gonna figure out or she's not, but she's also doesn't understand the content. So what good is that? I think we should be looking at the data, like Ovando says, and realizing that the data points where it points, and it leads us to the conclusion that the best way ELL students will learn is that getting a bilingual education is the best way that they will ultimately succeed in American schools, because I think a lot of policymakers go, they have to learn English as quickly as possible to assimilate to the culture so that they can be productive in American society, which, okay, yeah, I mean, learning English is going to make it easier to function in American society, but before they do that, they have to be able to get their bearings in a school system. And why wouldn't we want them to have some sort of assistance in their native home language to help them at least get context of what's happening? Because you throw these kids in a school that is English speaking, and they've come from somewhere where they have learned very little to no English. They don't understand the context of what's going on. They're just sitting there listening to English, and like maybe they're getting a few words. So, I think we know what's best for students who are coming from other countries that aren't English speaking, or English is not the first language there. In Yet in most parts of America, our education system is completely and utterly failing those kids. Um, and I think this week, this week's readings were hard, and it's hard to not feel discouraged after this week's readings, honestly. Um, and this is one of those that was just tough to listen to, you know, listen to more and read more. People talk about how there's another group of kids we're failing, but yeah, ELL kids are another group that we are doing a disservice to a lot of times, unfortunately. I do really appreciate, though, all the good leaders who are here doing the work trying to figure out how to become good school leaders so that maybe we can solve some of these problems. Thanks, guys.